When we think of murder, we often think of rage, jealousy, greed, theft. But sometimes the motive isn't passionate at all. It's sloth, the deadly sin of laziness, avoidance, and the refusal to face life's responsibilities that each of us have in our lives. Today, we are diving into the very chilling case of John List, a man who chose the easy way out, not just for himself, but he chose it for his entire family. In 1971, in Westfield, New Jersey, that was the kind of place that you would really call picture perfect. Manicured lawns, safe streets. It looked like a postcard suburb. And in one of those homes lived the List family. It was, in fact, a mansion. John, his wife, Helen, they had 3 children, Patricia, Frederick, and John Jr., and also John's elderly mother lived in the house with them. And to the outside world, they looked respectable, stable, and to many, enviable. But behind closed doors, John's life was unraveling. He'd lost his job at the bank. His wife was ill. His teenage daughter wanted to be an actress. No big deal other than he disapproved. He didn't believe that she should be an actress. And John himself, well, he couldn't bear the financial loss and financial ruin and the shame he felt as a result of that. So instead of starting over and grinding through like all of us have to do every day in our lives, he pretended. Every morning, he got up to go to work. He put on his suit, he put on his tie, he left the house, and then he would sit and read at the train station the entire time, too paralyzed to admit his financial failures. And on November 9th of 1971, John made a decision rooted not in fury, but in being a coward, sloth, in its deadliest form. Sloth is defined as a failure to care for or make an effort in fulfilling one's responsibilities and duties. This can manifest as disengagement from relationship or neglecting spiritual growth. And at the end of the day, resulted in murder. This is the why behind the crime, the motive. I'm Ashley Wilcott. As a TV anchor, a former judge, a trial attorney, I would say that almost every single case that I've seen, that I've dealt with personally, has intersected with one of the 7 deadly sins: pride, greed, wrath, envy, lust, gluttony, and sloth, the opposite of the 7 heavenly virtues, temptations that when taken too far, turn deadly. This week, we break down the case of a husband, father, provider who didn't just wear out. He got lazy and decided to kill his entire family so that he could have an easier life. A little later, I am joined by Dr. Debbie Goodman, a criminologist, professor, author, and expert analyst on TV, where we get into how in the world a father, a provider, a loving husband could possibly resort to the murder of his entire family. Let's get into it. This is the Deadly 7. The morning of November 9th of 1971, John List shot his wife, Helen, in their kitchen in their mansion. Then he went upstairs and he killed his own elderly mother. He waited for his children to come home from school. One by one, he then shot each of them multiple times. Patricia, Frederick, and finally John Jr. John Jr. fought the hardest of all, taking multiple bullets before he fell. Afterward, John took these steps. He carefully placed each of their bodies in sleeping bags and then put them in the ballroom of their mansion. The only body he left upstairs was his elderly mother. And then, really one of the coldest acts of calculated avoidance, he turned the temperature on the air conditioner as low as it would go. He cut himself out of every family photo in the house, and then he disappeared. For weeks, that house stood silent. until police discovered the crime scene. When the police responded, a radio was still playing classical music. And the family, well, they lay together in the ballroom as though frozen in time with the mother upstairs. John List had disappeared. He was gone. This case haunted investigators for nearly 2 decades. Breeze Knoll, the family's mansion, it was such a mansion it had its own name, Breeze Knoll. It eventually burned down in a mysterious fire. Coincidence or not? Likely not. But no one was ever charged with that. And John List, you wonder what happened to him? He built a new life under a fake name where he lived for 18 years before he was caught. Here's how he was caught. In 1989, America's Most Wanted aired a bust of what List might look like after nearly 2 decades on the run. Within weeks, after all the tips were received, he was arrested. He was living in Denver, Colorado, and using the name Bob Clark. He had a whole new life. He had disappeared as John List. In court, prosecutors argued that sloth had been his motive all along. He didn't want to face bankruptcy, did not want to work harder, and he didn't want to endure the shame. So instead of effort, he chose annihilation. Here's evidence that was presented by the prosecution. Certainly no doubt, after hearing this evidence, that John List did it. First of all, interesting, he wrote a handwritten letter detailing why he killed his family, and he addressed this to his pastor. In that letter, he claimed he was saving them. He was doing them a favor, saving their souls from corruption and moral decline. I guess he didn't feel like he had to save his own soul from corruption and moral decline because he went and lived a whole new life without his family. The crime scene evidence, grueling crime scene. There were autopsy reports, that confirm multiple gunshot wounds to each of the family members. Again, the placement of the bodies. Helen and all 3 of their children were found in sleeping bags in the ballroom, and the mother was upstairs. The evidence that he had planned this, that it was premeditated, that it was deliberate, it wasn't insanity, were things like he left the lights on. He changed that thermostat. He left the radio on. He made it look like people were home. The cold air prevented those bodies from rotting as quickly, so they weren't discovered as quickly. He then took time to cut himself out of all the family photographs. He made all the effort to stop mail deliveries from the home. And he also even reached out to the schools to say that they were going on a very long trip, that the kids wouldn't be at school so that there would be no suspicion at the fact that children didn't show up for school the very next day. The prosecution also introduced financial documents because these showed that there were foreclosure notices for the home, the mansion that they lived in, that John List had drained his mother's savings in order to maintain the appearances that they were fine financially. And the other piece of this is no one else knew that he had lost his job at the bank. By no one else, I mean no one else in the family knew he had lost his job. These murders were methodical, as was the aftermath. His disappearance. He abandoned his car, and then he moved to Denver, where he started a life using a false identity. The prosecution, they dotted every I and crossed every T. They had a handwriting expert to make certain that the evidence showed that the handwritten letter explaining why he killed his family was, in fact, in his handwriting. At the end of the day, it was more than enough evidence. This jury had no issue convicting him of all 5 murders of his own family. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole, and he was in prison when he died in 2008. Dr. Debbie Goodman joining me now. My friend, thank you so much for joining. Criminologist, professor, author. I want to start by asking you this. how does this happen? How does someone like a John List decide to not only eliminate his whole family, kill them all, cuts his picture out of the picture frames, and then takes off and recreates this new life for him with a new name?
Unbelievable, Judge Ashley, as always. Thank you so much for the honor and privilege of joining you.
Always.
And what a great case to revisit. So, thank you for bringing it to the attention of your audience. So, how does this happen, Judge? There are a few theories in criminology, and that's usually the number one question I'm asked, right? The why question. So, let's start first with choice. Judge, as you well know, all of your years of expertise, people are simply choosing these types of behaviors and crime. Now, if we really dial it back to all the different levels and layers of criminality here, we have a crime that we call familicide. What is that? That means an individual who potentially obliterates an entire family. Shocking, startling. We have a secondary crime within this case, Judge. As you know, we call it filicide. That would be the killing by a parent of his or her children. So we have 3 deceased children. And then lastly, we have a mother who has also been killed, and that is matricide, killing of mom. So within the framework of this one case of mass murder, we have the entire family obliterated. How and why does it happen? You are right on point of choosing the deadly sin of sloth. This individual simply decided to step away from his life, from his responsibilities, from all that he was supposed to be doing, and just killed them all, Judge. And we also in criminology called this disposal theory, when individuals feel that an individual or individuals have become almost like an impediment, an inconvenience, or interference, and they say goodbye.
All right, so the disposal theory. So this isn't the first time you've heard of a case like this. You pointed out he killed all 3 of his children. He killed his wife. He killed his mother, who lived in the mansion with them. They were very wealthy, lived in a mansion. Mother had money. He burned through mother's money, which may be part of the reason that he decided to kill her as well. But tell us a little bit about why there's an actual term for this, and it must not be the first time you've seen this.
Oh, indeed, Judge Ashley. And even if we want to bring the viewers to more modern day present cases that you discuss and that they're well versed on, let's just start with Alex Murdaugh. A very similar type of case, is it not? Where we had this individual who decided that he wanted to play the facade, right? He seemingly was this accomplished attorney, an entire family lineage of legal scholars. But what was happening, Judge? He was unraveling, and he literally puts on the facade so that other people would think he was successful. So I think we could do some comparison here with the List case and the Murdaugh case, whereby individuals are just literally washing their hands of their responsibilities involving seemingly people that they know.
And you're right, it's an unraveling. We know that it goes from being successful, being responsible, to, in both cases, I would argue, having financial difficulties, spiraling out of control about those financial difficulties, and no longer being able to handle it. And to your point, you mentioned the deadly sin, sloth, and the reason that I picked that, because what a lazy ass way to get out of responsibility, right? There's no proactive, let me do something about it, let me better my life, let me be honest about what's happening and sort out different options. Instead, I think it's just that lazy way out, and it's a failure to take care of one's responsibilities. They don't make any effort to fulfill their responsibilities. And the interesting part to me, Dr. Debbie, is that they do have to take active steps to kill their family,
Yes.
to
100%,
to
Joe.
turn down the air conditioning in the home where he left 3 of the bodies in a sleeping bag, 4 of the bodies, the 3 children and the mother in sleeping bags in one of the big rooms, and then his mother he left in her bedroom. But these are all active steps to go around and cut himself out of all the family pictures in this mansion. Active steps. And so it's not that sloth means you're just sitting there doing nothing. That can be the case. But in this instance, it's actually taking active steps to eliminate the issue, being lazy to not deal with your responsibilities.
100%, Judge Ashley. Beautifully said. And then doesn't it again speak to all of the elements we look toward when we talk about first degree murder? Now we're talking about first degree murder times 5. So you're 100% on point when indeed it has been planned, it's premeditated, it's willful, it's with malice. And yet, I'm sure the viewers are wondering, as are we, well, what does it really mean that he puts the temperature down? And why did he put them in sleeping bags? And why does mom remain unto herself? You know what the answer is, Judge, in my opinion? It's all about control. You see, these individuals who kill, and particularly mass murderers from A to Z, they want to control it all. The day, the time, the victimology, the weapon, pre the deaths as well as post-mortem, Judge. So it doesn't surprise me, as horrendous as it all is, but these are what these people do. They control it all.
Continuing to control even after he kills his entire family. Do you think it was a red flag that he started off by putting on his tie, going to work? But then we learn, in retrospect, he wasn't at all going to work when he left the house. He had on his suit, he had on his tie. He loves to go to work, and find out that he goes to the train station every day and sits and reads. And that's
Right?
it. And then he comes home at the end of the day and pretends like he's been at work. Red flag?
Oh, absolutely red flag, Judge. But also, doesn't it speak to this whole facade? John List, Alec Murdaugh wanting everybody to think this is a very successful individual with a wonderful career and beautiful family. That's what these people do, Judge. They're such master manipulators, and they can't handle, as you said earlier, any type of unraveling. And truly, their lives are in a very desperate spiral. Yet, back to this control. They've got to have some kind of baseline of control once they've made a decision, as did Alex Murdaugh with the killing of Maggie and son Paul, and as did John List with the 5 family members. It actually gives them some kind of solace to know what they're going to do, planning it out, and then ultimately carrying it out.
Alec Murdaugh, as you know, he chose to testify at his own trial. So I think he thought he could manipulate the jury and be charismatic and they would buy what he was selling. And the problem I had watching him testify is I thought the ego of this man to think that he could come up with this plan to get out of his responsibilities and execute the plan, execute his family, and still walk away from it and be just fine. Is that ego piece something that's common in these types of crimes? And do you think that John List had that same type of personality?
Yes, and yes, Judge Ashley. Yes, I think the ego is such a central and centric part of this whole puzzle of trying to figure these people out, Alex Murdaugh. But think about all of the cases, Judge, that have been discussed that we are well versed on, as is your audience members. Scott Peterson, did he have an ego? Did he want to control the outcome of Lacey and potentially unborn child Connor? Indeed. What about Chris Watts and the control of Shannon, his wife, who was pregnant at the time with unborn child Nico and 2 beautiful little daughters, Celeste and Bella? And even most recently, Judge, so many cases we're talking about this Jose Soto Escalera and the death of his alleged pregnant mistress, carrying his child. So no matter what case we point to, it is absolutely astonishing, Judge Ashley, to me, as a criminologist of 30 years, no matter what case and no matter what dynamic, I promise you, these people think they are getting away with it.
They think they're getting away with it. I just have to mention Escalera is the case that he was recently convicted of killing his girlfriend and the unborn child. But now, today, starts his sentencing phase because the state is seeking the death penalty against Escalera. We know John List got life sentences without parole for the 5 murders that he was convicted of. But let's do a deeper dive into some of the evidence at trial because as a renowned criminologist, I want your expertise about this. One thing that, first of all, he was undetected for 18 years. He took off, he assumed a new name, and it wasn't until this case was on America's Most Wanted that some tips were given and they were able to track him down and figure out it was him. But in the meantime, He wrote a confession letter where he admitted to killing his family, and he left it to his pastor, but he left it there at the time he committed the murders. And he says he was saving their souls, all about them, from corruption and moral decline.
Interesting. And again, if we want to align with something similar to that statement, we could turn toward Andrea Yates, could we not? Because remember, Andrea Yates, who was a accomplished and educated nurse, and we're not 100% sure, are we? Did she really have postpartum depression? That was the outcome. However, in drowning her 5 children, Judge, as you know, a horrendous case, what did she say as to the why? Something similar. She felt they would be in a better place. Now, the question is, do we now introduce insanity into this equation? I don't think so. Not in the Andrea Yates case. You know why? At least for me, my humble opinion, she waited the 1 hour. Recall, her husband Rusty left, and within the hour of 9 a.m. to 10 a.m., 5 beautiful children were drowned. So if we're looking at insanity, that would suggest the individual doesn't know what he or she is doing, doesn't know what he or she is doing is wrong. I think John List knew exactly what he was doing and simply, again, wanted to walk away from, as you suggest, with the deadly sin of sloth, all of the responsibilities, reliabilities that come with being a husband, being a father, being an individual employed at a bank, which we know what he was not. He was fired, but pretended and acted as if, as you suggested, put on the shirt and tie and went every day to a job that didn't exist.
And he burned through all of his mother's savings as well, and so he may have been at the end of his financial rope anyways when he committed these atrocious crimes. And Andrea Yates, I'm from Houston, Texas, and that was the area that she was in, and so it was a big deal in the local news. I followed that case closely, and I would agree with you. One of the important things in all of these cases to really consider things like the insanity defense is the timing, the
Yes.
chronological order of events. Because if there is time for the premeditation, and premeditation can be formed in a second,
Yes.
however, you have to look at those things to determine whether or not that defense, and they get evaluated by experts to determine whether or not they were truly insane, for instance, at the time they committed the crime. She was not. John List was not. He never
Hmm.
raised that as a defense. A couple of the other things that really troubled me was he shot his 3 children and his wife
Yes.
multiple times. To me, that indicates rage. It's a personal, because oftentimes when you see a murder, it's one shot to the head and that's it. They're done. Not here.
Hmm.
Multiple shots to each of the family members. What does that mean to you as a criminologist?
Right. You hit the nail on the head, Judge Ashley. That's exactly what it would suggest to me. The rage, the fury, the anger, and there is such a thing as overkill. And when we see crime scenes such as this with multiple shots or multiple stab wounds, believe it or not, we would also look toward that inner circle, right? That's one of the areas that I study and that I teach about at the university, victimology. We look at the victims. With whom are the victims most tied, most aligned, closest with? Direct family. So I know it's one of those tough pills to swallow, as you well know, Judge, and the audience and the viewers, because how could it be that the family members are the first ones to be interrogated and interviewed? But we know statistically the likelihood of there being some kind of discord, especially when we see an entire family obliterated. Investigators know, investigation 101, right? To whom to turn? To the direct family.
In the Alec Murdaugh case, I really felt like he purposely created a chaotic scene, and so that it was hard to figure out who was where, and his story of coming in and they're back with the dog, and all of these details were confusing to sort through. A little bit different in this case of John List, because we know that he actually stopped the mail and deliveries from the mansion. He notified the school that the families were traveling. He did all of these things, and the prosecution used it to say not just premeditation, but forethought and the planning and the level of details he put into it. He turned down the thermostat, as already mentioned, so that the bodies wouldn't start to rot and smell as quickly. He left lights on in the mansion so it looked like someone was home. And in fact, when they found the bodies, classical music was still playing, as if these bodies were frozen in time. A very different scene than, for instance, the Alec Murdaugh murders.
True. But wherein lie the similarities? I think the idea of orchestrating it in these defendants' minds so well that nobody could possibly think it's them by maybe hiding under a cloak, let's say, of financial comfort and status and some level of professionalism. So it's really astonishing, Judge, that the mindset of these defendants who are able to take, whether it's one life, a double homicide, triple, quadruple, workplace violence, school based violence, or here we are with family violence, the mindset is still the same. They're planning it, they're carrying out. In criminology, Judge, we say mens rea, actus reus, two very important elements. That's usually what I start with when I'm asked to analyze a case, just to remind mens rea, the criminal mind. How is it that one is actually thinking these things through? And then secondarily, the actus reus, the act itself. So when we have both, we know that there's no error, there's no accident, and there's no lack of intent. Both are aligned, both are here in the List case and the Murdaugh case and so many of the other cases we've been discussing through the years.
And the prosecutors in this case used the evidence to show that this was calculated and it was not temporary insanity. It was a deliberate intent. And they were successful in proving that. 18 years he was free. And you have to wonder, I know, Dr. Debbie, we don't know the answer to this, but what must his life have been like for 18 years after these murders? Do you think he was able to compartmentalize and really create a new identity and live that life without remorse, without
Yes,
empathy,
Judge.
without guilt? You do. Tell us
I
more about that.
Yeah, I truly do, Judge, only because, you and I and our colleagues and our family members and friends, we're very logical people, we're reasonable people, we're kind, we're caring, we're compassionate. So we put the period there. Now we segue over to these people. They're totally different than we are, Judge. I truly believe so many of these killers of whom we analyze and do the deep dive, they are psychopaths. That's it. They don't have the remorse. They don't have the care, the concern. It's as if they could go and kill. Part of what I teach at the university, serial and mass murder. These people function and think very, very differently than the rest of us. But because we're so logical, we're cerebral, we're intellectual, we try to meet them where we are. So we can't possibly wrap our heads around this. But they are just cut differently. They think differently. They're wired differently. And it's as if they can kill people such as a Dennis Rader, such as a Jeffrey Dahmer, such as our most recent Brian Koberger, and then go about life as if nothing happened. It's absolutely eerie, horrendous, and astonishing. But even somebody like a John List, I put him in that category too. A
It's
psychopath.
crazy. Yeah, it's
Crazy.
crazy. And I have to remind myself, to your point, that any reasonable, rational human being is never going to think like that. It's hard for us to understand how any individual crosses the line to actually commit the murders. But we know that's what John List did. We know John List, sloth, the seventh deadly sin. This is one that caused him to not meet his duties and responsibilities, but instead annihilate everybody in his family and start over for 18 years. The only good news in this case is that the jury did convict him of all 5 murders, sentenced to life in prison, where he died in prison in 2008. Dr. Debbie Goodman, always love your insight, your expertise. Can't thank you enough for today.
Thank you so much, Judge. Always an honor and privilege to join you.
Thank you.
Thank you.